Welcome, and thank you for joining us here tonight. I am David Anthony Durham. I've been instructed to pause at this point.
David is my partner in crime and our host for tonight. I'm George Martin, of course, R.R. Martin. I should always include that.
Yeah.
David and I have known each other a few years. I think I met him first at the World Fantasy Convention in Saratoga.
Exactly.
Where he displayed his courage, because we were doing the mass autographing where all the authors sit all around the ballroom and people line up to do them, and he was told by all his friends not to sit beside me. But he did sit beside me anyway, a fearless fellow, and then we got to talking. But David is one of the rising stars in science fiction and fantasy and other things. He's written Western novels. He's written, of course, fantasy, the Acacia trilogy, which is an epic fantasy. He's written historical fiction, a novel about Spartacus, a novel about Hannibal. And he won, a few years after Saratoga, he won the award for the Best New Writer in Science Fiction, the John W. Campbell Award, and got a handsome tiara, which I think he wore for a year and no longer wears.
Had to pass it on.
And at some point, I was so impressed by his stuff that I invited him to my wild card, Shared World Superhero Anthology. And he accepted that without telling me that he'd never written any short fiction before. But he learned on the job and came up with some great characters for us, aided by his son, but we won't talk about that. And we've been working together on that ever since, and on various other things. David has also been working on various aspects of the television show, Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, the various other spin-offs we're developing. He was in the writer's room for the Long Night show, which did not go forward, but he was one of the people who was there. He's been in some of the other writers' rooms for some of the successor shows that we're developing. And yeah, so we're doing a lot of stuff together, you know, wild cards and Westeros and this, that, and the other thing. So it's great to be here doing this with you.
Absolutely. I am thrilled to be here. Really glad that I sat down and didn't listen to my friends, because yeah, it's been a great working and friendship since then. So awesome. Thanks for that introduction too. Okay, so we're here with George, who needs no introduction, obviously, and we're in New York City here at Random House, and we have a great program with various segments. We'll hear clips of the Fire and Blood audiobook, and accompanied by illustrations from The Rise of the Dragon. George and I will discuss last night's explosive season finale for House of the Dragon, and talk about all things Targaryen, including a round of Westerosi Would You Rather. Lastly, we'll listen to George answer as many burning fan questions as he can. That's what we're doing.
And we have to have commercials for these books at
Yes.
various points. These are the books that we're boosting here. And you notice there's two of them. Fire and Blood came out in 2018. And that's the first volume of a 2-volume history of House Targaryen, from pretty much from Aegon's conquest to the end of the regency of King Aegon III. There will be a second book, Fire and Blood Volume 2, or maybe Blood and Fire, when I get around to writing it in my copious spare time. This is and that book, or part of that book, is what House of the Dragon is based on. This book is the new book, Rise of the Dragon, that's just coming out tomorrow. It's coming out tomorrow, I believe, yes. And it should be available in your favorite local bookstore from your on-site bookseller. This has the same text, kind of, as that, but much abridged, because this is mostly, as you see, a beautiful, large coffee table art book. It has 150 original pieces of art by some of the best fantasy illustrators in the world. And we're going to show some of them to you during the course of the evening and talk about them, but with all that art, we couldn't fit in the whole gigantic, thick. So we abridged it and did a just the facts version. So Rise of the Dragon, Fire and Blood. Buy them both, but don't read them right away because they have the whole story of where the show ends, and you just want to read to the point where it ended, and then otherwise you'll be spoiled.
I have some thoughts on that, but we'll get to those.
Okay.
Get to those. So first up on the agenda is House of the Dragon, season 1, the finale last night. What did you think of that? And 2, that's 1, and the part 2 of that is that I know you had seen a rough cut before, but not the finished version.
Right.
And I'm wondering, how different are those?
Oh, yeah. Well, they're considerably different. I mean, I've worked in television and film quite a while, so it's not. I've seen rough cuts before, but the special effects, color timing, sound adjustment, all of these things make a huge difference.
Yeah.
Seeing the big dragon battle that was the highlight of last night's thing in a rough cut is kind of, not quite the same
Right.
as that amazing sequence they did last night with the storm and the dragons appearing and disappearing in the clouds, and that's the magic of special effects, the magic of cinematography, and it's considerably different.
Yeah.
Although my favorite, I saw many of the episodes in a rough cut ahead of time. Do you remember the, I think it was episode 3 where the king went hunting? And he was hunting for a white hart, and they find a hart, which is not actually white, but he deals with that hart. Well, in the rough cut, the part of the hart was played by 2 stuntmen in bright blue costumes, the Blue Man Group, sort of. One of them was holding the other one around the waist, and the king is stabbing at them with his. So the king is hunting the Blue Man Group. It was hilarious when you saw it, but of course, by the time it was finished, it was beautiful, realistic-looking art. So you have to get used to, if you work in this business, to know what a rough cut is and being able to visualize what the final version would be.
Amazing. I mean, do you ever think there could be a special where we get to see some of these rough cuts, like they did for Lord of the Rings and stuff like that?
I don't know. I think they may, at some point, do a Blu-ray, a DVD, and when they do that, they often add special features. Now, what kind of special features they add? Well, there are deleted scenes in many of the episodes, so we could add back the deleted scenes, and that's something that they frequently like to do. Right. Sometimes there are blooper reels where actors walk into a wall, or they forget the line, or they do something similar. You could add something like that. I don't know if they would do the Blue Man Group, though. I think the special effects wizards like magicians. They don't want to reveal their tricks. Okay. Yeah, they like to keep that secret.
Right. And the episode itself and how it wraps up the first season. Oh.
Of course, we've been working this on a long time, so I knew where we were going, where we would wrap up the season. But I think it did it very powerfully, and now we just have to do it again for season 2, which is also a challenge because everything gets bigger and more characters come into play, and we switched to more locations. I mean, the first season we were pretty much King's Landing, Dragonstone, Driftmark were the main locations. Occasionally we went to the Stepstones for a little battle and dragon action, or to Storm's End, but mostly it was centered on that. But now, as things get serious, you'll be going to other locations, Winterfell and the Starks, and possibly the Riverlands, Harrenhal. All of these places will be seen. More families and dragons will come into it, and it just gets bigger. So.
And you're saying all this, but we have to wait to see that.
Sadly, yes, you have to wait. Probably have to wait until 2024, because I don't think this show is so big. I don't think we can have it ready next year in 2023. You know, it came on in August, so ideally the new season would come on in August of a year later, but it's too big. We can't do it that. Now, it may not be a full 2 years. Maybe come 2024, we'll be able to bring it on in like April or May instead of August, but I don't think it's much chance it's going to be before that.
Right. Well, I thoroughly enjoyed the show and watched a number of episodes twice. And then just the other day, my wife and I went back to the first season, to the first episode, and I felt like, wow, we have been through a lot. I mean, I guess it's the years passing and all the events. It was almost like I was being reminded that this journey, it had been quite a journey, basically, even though it's not particularly far flung. But in rewatching them, I recommend it to folks. The episodes, I think each one gets better as I rewatch it.
Were you troubled by the time jumps and the castings, as some people say they were?
I wouldn't say troubled. The feeling is this, that I wish that we could have spent more time with everything, and seeing some of the relationships develop there. So I would have loved for it to be slower, but that's not like, I'm not really troubled, because I also respect and understand and can see the decision-making process that went into those choices.
Yeah,
how about you?
It's always an interesting question. I mean, you may have to deal with it yourself someday. I mean, your Hannibal novel, for example. What if they made a feature film of Hannibal or a TV series?
It's in development.
I mean, he has a long life. Where do you begin it? Do you have little child Hannibal? Does he grow up, or do you already have him being fully fleshed, going forth to battle in, I guess, Spain initially? Yeah. And winning that, invading Italy, but that took years. You campaigned in Italy for like a decade or something like that, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's a long time period.
Then he got called back to fight the Battle of Zama, and then he had to run away, and he lived in exile for a while. How do you present all that? What format do you do? And it's a challenge. So anything that's a lengthy period of time, I think you have your choice where to begin it. And if there are things that come before it, do you present them in dialogue? Do you present them in terms of flashbacks or dreams? Or do you do the chronological thing and let the years pass, and which does occasionally call for recasting?
Yeah. As I watched the show, I was impressed again and again by the decisions that needed to be made, like kind of again and again each episode. I could see that it was all quite deliberate, and you might lose something over here, but you're gaining something over there. What do you think? Maybe time jumps aside, were some of the hardest decisions to make in approaching the show?
Well, I mean, the hardest decision to make was the one I've just alluded to, is where to begin. I mean, history is continuous. A Fire and Blood, well, both books actually, and this one longer than that one, present the history of the Targaryen dynasty, largely starting with any detail in Aegon's conquest, which is when Aegon the Conqueror and his two sisters started taking over Westeros. Now, actually, there's history before that. Aenar the Exile and his daughter Daenerys the Dreamer, who foresaw the doom of Valyria, came to Westeros and moved into Dragonstone like a century earlier. And then they had children, and they died, and the children became the lords. And there was a number of generations that are listed there, but I don't go into any detail about them until I get to Aegon and Visenya and Rhaenys and their three dragons. And then there's Aegon's conquest. We could have begun then. We could have begun, with Aegon and not even reached the Dance of the Dragons for, 5 seasons or something, because there's a lot of history is continuous. One of the things that inspired me to do Fire and Blood was a popular history book that I read way back in the 50s by Thomas B. Costain, who was a very popular historical novelist of the period. And he mostly wrote historical fiction, but he did write a 4-volume history of the Plantagenets. And it starts from the beginning of the Plantagenet family, and it goes all the way through the end of the Plantagenets, which was the Wars of the Roses, when they were exterminated by the Tudors. So that's one way to do things. I mean, history just goes on and on. We see these shows, movies, television shows, books that have a beginning, a middle, and end. Okay, here's a book about William the Conqueror, and it's like William the Conqueror is born, William the Conqueror dies. But no, he's part of there was someone before William the Conqueror. He had a father, he had a mother. Where did they come from? He had a father and mother. And after William the Conqueror died, there are more things. There's all the stories of his children. So, and who gets to be king after him. So that was the big challenge. Right. Now, we knew around 2016, it became clear that Game of Thrones was going to end probably with 7 seasons. As it happened, 7 grew and it became 8. But at that point, HBO sort of said, well, what do we need a new show, and I pitched them 2 shows. One of them was a Dunk and Egg show, which they didn't pick up on, but I pitched them the Dance of the Dragons, which I already knew about. I'd already written about to some extent in some novellas and in the World of Ice and Fire history book, another illustrated coffee table book like that. And they liked that, so we were going with the Dance of the Dragons, and we've been developing it, since 2016 in one form and another. There were a couple of the writers on the show before Ryan Condal came on, and Ryan, of course, has done an amazing job. But one of the big issues with all of these writers was where to begin.
Yeah.
Where to begin? Do you begin with Aegon's Conquest? That's a long time ago. Do you begin with, you saw the show, you saw where Ryan began. And I think he made a great choice. He began in 101 with the Great Council, where the Lords vote that Jaehaerys' heir, he's just lost his son Balon, who has died of appendicitis. So who is his heir now? And they choose, the Lords vote to choose Viserys over Rhaenys. And then you immediately skip forward. There's just that one prologue scene, and then you skip forward to skip over Jaehaerys' death, skip over all that. Yeah. Viserys has been in power for a number of years, and you pick it up with the tournament, the conflict with Daemon, the birth of his male heir, and of course it turns into a horror when his wife Emma, Queen Emma, dies, and the child dies a day later, and Rhaenyra is declared heir. You recall all of that from...
Yeah. I do indeed.
But I don't know if I should reveal this. Maybe I should wait for a Blu-ray or something after the show. But that was not, handed down by some muse from ancient Greece. Myself and the other writers had a lot of spirited discussions about where to begin that story. One of the writers wanted to begin it wanted to begin it essentially with Emma dying. So skip the Great Council, skip the tournament, a scream sounds out, Emma is dead. Right. That's where you begin. So that was one possibility. And another of the writers wanted to begin even later than that, to begin with Viserys dying. So you open Act 1, Scene 1, Viserys is, and what happens there? Well, then you have to present all that material in flashbacks or dialogue. That becomes challenging too. But we discussed all these possibilities. And the other possibility we discussed, which was actually my favorite possibility, but nobody liked it except me. I would have began it much earlier. I would have began it like 40 years earlier with an episode I would have called The Heir and the Spare, in which Jaehaerys' 2 sons, Aemon and Balon, are alive. And we see the friendship, but also the rivalry between the 2 sides of the of the great house. And then, Aemon dies accidentally when a Mirish crossbowman shoots him by accident on Tarth, and then Jaehaerys has to decide who becomes the new heir. Is it the daughter of the older son who's just died, or is it the second son who's only, has children of his own and is a man, and she's just a teenage girl? All of that stuff. So you could have presented all of that stuff, but then you would have had 40 more years, and you would have even more time jumps, and you would have even more recastings. And I was the only one who was really enthused about that. So I don't know, but I've always loved the poetry of Rudyard Kipling, and I love his poem In the Neolithic Age, where the refrain is there are 69 ways of constructing tribal lays, and every single one of them is right. And I think that's true for writing books or television shows. There are many ways you can approach these things, and if you do it well, it can work.
Well, throughout all this, we're kind of indirectly talking about Fire and Blood, and there's so much material in this about the Targaryens. But could you just introduce the book and your approach to it? It's a history book, but there's a lot of different versions of things, and
Yes, well, of course, as you know, I'm writing and have been writing for many decades now, A Song of Ice and Fire, which is the series of books that was the basis of Game of Thrones. And there's still 2 more books to do, and those are, conventional novels, although they're very, very ambitious and complex novels because I have multiple viewpoint characters. I'm interweaving all of the different stories. Essentially, I'm writing 7, 9, 12 novels and interweaving them together. But they are conventional novels. Each chapter has a viewpoint character, and you see it through that. When it became clear that we were going to do the Dance of the Dragon show, but that ultimately became House of the Dragon, but initially we called it Dance of the Dragons, we wanted a book to go with that, and I already had the seeds of the book from material that was in The World of Ice and Fire, and from the novellas I'd written for my friend Gardner Dozois, Princess and the Queen, and The Rogue Prince, and so forth. So I actually asked, we're in the Random House offices here, and I'm about to get them in terrible trouble. But I asked them, well, do you want me to just ignore the new show that's coming down the pike, or should I finish that book so you can get it out and then go back to, and they said, yeah, give us the new book that's closer to being done. You still have 2 more books. So I put Winds of Winter aside for a while, and I concentrated on finishing Fire and Blood. There was a lot of it already there, but I had to expand it and polish it. And particularly, I had to fill in the reign of Jaehaerys, because if you look at the earlier versions, he reigned for 55 years, but he was the good king. And so pretty much all I said, well, he was a good king, and there were half a century of peace and prosperity. Well, nobody wants to read that. That's boring. So I had to, flesh all of that out and write a material on Jaehaerys, and I did, and that came out in 2018. And then I switched immediately back to, Winds of Winter.
Right. You mentioned 2018. I read it in 2018, shortly after it came out, and it was, quite an experience. So much history, so many names, so many births and deaths and betrayals, and every now and then someone does something nice, I guess. It was an awful lot of it, and I loved it, but it was also kind of overwhelming. Thing is, that really kind of set me up to enjoy watching House of the Dragon, because all those names, or some of those names, became actual, people, actors who did amazing jobs, and I could connect with them.
Jobs, yes. Yeah, I love our actors. Yeah.
So for me, having read it ahead of time was kind of a pleasure, because every now and then I would go, oh, I know that just set up something that's going to happen later on, and I was kind of being reminded of it, and I feel like it's. Yes, you could like not read Fire and Blood, but I think you don't lose anything, because you're also there are various versions of a lot of events in the book, But you still don't know what's going to be on the show exactly.
Which is, yes, but I had a lot of fun writing that book. I hope it was fun for the readers too. I think it was fun for many of the readers, but not all. There are people who wanted a conventional novel.
Oh, sure.
But, if you look at A Song of Ice and Fire, the main series that I'm writing, I still have 2 more books to write, and the series is only covering a handful of years, the events of a handful of years. To cover 2.5 centuries, I would have had to write 20 novels of, Aegon the Conqueror and his 2 sons, and Maegor the Cruel, and this revolt and that revolt. It would have taken me a long time. I'm not the fastest writer in the world. So I decided to do it as a fake history, modeled to a great degree on what Thomas B. Costain did with his Plantagenet history. And then the other thing that got me going was the thought of history and how history is recorded to us. And the thing is, we don't, we think we know history, but we don't. We don't have time machines. We rely on the people who pass it down to us, and there are often contradictions. That was really brought home to me many decades ago when I was writing a novel never published about yellow journalism in New York City in the 1890s. And it was, it was a great era. There were 14 daily newspapers in New York. I was writing a story, sort of a historical horror novel, about 3 reporters competing for a big story, tracking down a killer. And one of them was a reporter for the New York World, Joseph Pulitzer's New York World, which was one of the dominant papers of the time. And the World was down on Newspaper Row. All of the newspapers were on like the same block. But Pulitzer built the tallest building in the world at the time. And he topped it with a golden dome. And it stood right next to the Sun, which was a rival paper. And the editors didn't like each other, so people joked that from his golden dome, Pulitzer could spit down on the Sun. But the thing is, when I'm researching this book, and there was no internet then, so I had gathered every book I could do about journalism, the period, and the life of Pulitzer, and the life of everything, and I'm researching it. A very simple question: how many stories was the World building? It's the tallest building in the world. It's a famous building, and I encounter 2 different versions. It had 15 stories. It had 14 stories. And then I try to dig more, and there's some 14, there's some 50, and then I encounter one that said it had 20 stories. It's like, what the hell? The building doesn't exist anymore. I don't have a time travel. Right. How many stories did it have? It's a simple fact. And then you go from that, and you look at the history, and history is full of wonderful stories. I draw a lot in medieval history, but Edward II deposed as King of England by his own son, and imprisoned and then murdered, supposedly by having a red-hot poker thrust up his ass. Or really? Or did someone invent that story later? It's very colorful, but the things are that it's probably invented later. And then the Black Dinner of Scotland, which was one of the sources for the Red Wedding. The King of Scotland invites the Earl of Douglas, the Black Douglas, and his brother, who are 2 teenagers. One of them is like 18, one of them is like 16, to a dinner at his castle, and they have a lavish dinner. And then at the end, they bring out a big covered plate, silver platter, and a gloomy, sonorous song begins to do. And they lift a plate, and it's a black boar's head, which is the symbol of death. And then they take out the 2 Douglases and murder them. Great story. Very much inspired, the Red Wedding, although I did it. But did it ever happen? Probably not. Yes, the Douglases were certainly killed, but was there a song? But they made it better, some later thing made it better. So that got me all thinking. All of this stuff got me thinking about history and saying, I'm not just going to do a history. I'm going to do a history written a couple hundred years later. And when you're writing a book, I'm sure you do this with your book too. You have an idea for a scene, but then you have a different idea for a scene. Oh, which one should I go with? I'll go with this one. I'll go with that one. Oh, that one's too wild. People never believe it. I'll go with you tend to go with the conservative scene, but with that kind of thing, I could have it both ways. I could say, well, this is how Septon Eustace said it went, and this is how Grandmaster Orwell said it went, and this is how Mushroom said it went. And you pick which one, because we don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Archmaester Gildane doesn't know, and we don't know. You don't know, really, the truth about Hannibal or Spartacus in the books you've written about them. How much of your historical fiction is, in fact, made up compared to your fantasy?
It's kind of amazing that I can feel very proud, let's say, of Pride of Carthage, the Hannibal novel, and also know that he probably didn't speak one complete sentence of the dialogue that I gave him.
Right.
Like it's, and yet I'm hoping that it still captures the story and speaks to readers. But that the way that fantasy and history intermingle and inform each other, I think is amazing. When I was writing that book, I was driving around Spain with my wife and my kids. We were camping a lot, was drinking a lot of nice wine, and we were taking in ruins and we were doing research. But I kept realizing that the place that I needed to write about, it wasn't there anymore. Like,
Sure.
I'd go to a ruin, and it was, it was the Roman ruin, but then it was like a medieval ruin, and it was a modern city built on it and everything. So it kind of had to lean in to using my imagination. And I think that happening with Pride of Carthage is probably kind of opened some doors that led me to inevitably toward fantasy. And yeah.
It's odd because I love historical fiction as well as science fiction fantasy, and I read a lot of historical fiction. But there's a line, and I would be very hard-pressed to define it. I mean, sometimes I pick up a novel of historical fiction, and there's something in it that I just know is wrong. It just jars me right from the beginning, and it puts me right out of it. I'm reading a Julius Caesar novel, and it turns out he has a twin brother. Well, no, he didn't. Right. So I don't want to read about that anymore. But other things I'll let people get away with. Frequently I don't know. But I mean, I love one of my great influences in television is I, Claudius, which of course is based on the I, Claudius BBC series is based on the Robert Graves novels, I, Claudius and Claudius to God, which in turn is based on the history of Suetonius. And Suetonius lived hundreds of years after the events he was recording. He was the mushroom of his time. I mean, nobody ever died in Suetonius of natural causes. Everybody was poisoned or murdered or something like that, but it certainly makes for a lively read.
Yeah. Okay. We could keep talking, but now let's do something silly.
Oh dear. Okay.
I have a few questions here of the would you rather variety. So let's play that. Would you rather be a maester or join the King's Guard?
I would rather be a maester, of course. I mean, they're at the Citadel. They have books. I could read all day and write all day.
History.
Which is pretty much what I like. And the King's Guard, I would have to dress in armor. It's very hot and uncomfortable. And wear white all the time. It really gets dirty. Very hard to keep that white armor and the white cloak clean. And both of them take vows of chastity, so I wouldn't get any wives or girlfriends in either case. So might as well go with the maester.
Okay. I think I know what you'll say about this one, but then again, these two things are actually quite different. Would you rather have a dragon or a direwolf?
Well, that's an interesting question too. The dragon has certain advantages. Number one, it is you can fly. And I would love to be able to fly as a kid, I read superhero comics. I didn't want to be Batman swinging on a rope. I wanted to be Superman and flying through the skies and all of that stuff. Flying is a primal dream. So yeah, flying on a dragon and being able to burn the hell out of my enemies, that's useful too. On the other hand, the direwolves are friendlier than the dragons, and they're like big shaggy dogs, and there was probably more of a close and affectionate bond between them. And I would like to have a dire wolf right now at my house in Santa Fe. We moved into a new house a while ago. It's a beautiful house, and it has a little kind of waterfall in the back and a well, and has a couple pools, beautiful pools. And I stocked those pools with koi because I thought that would be cool.
Oh.
And the raccoons ate all of my koi. But if I had a dire wolf, those damn raccoons would stay the hell away.
They would indeed. Would you rather have the Hound or the Mountain play defense for the New York Giants?
You got to go with the Hound. I mean, the Mountain is bigger and he's fiercer, but he would get constant penalties for unsportsmanlike conduct and terrible things like that. You're not allowed to rip the head off opponents or pop their eyes out with your thumbs. That's definite no-no in the National Football League. So I'll go with the Hound.
Okay, so we have progressed in some ways over. Yeah. Would you rather have Tywin Lannister or Otto Hightower as your hand?
Ooh, boy. I don't know. I can't have Tyrion Lannister.
That was not one of the options.
I think Tywin, but it's hard. They're similar types. They're both pretty smart, but yeah.
Okay. Would you rather freeze to death beyond the wall or burn alive in dragonfire?
That's another tough one. Can I just live forever? No.
No.
I can't die the way Tyrion wanted to die. That's a pity. And I can't say how he wanted to die, but it's in the books. Read the books. He's asked that question by Shaga, son of Dolph. I think freezing. Fire is supposed to be a really, really painful way to die,
Yeah.
I've always heard.
Yeah, and that brings me back slightly to the dragon or direwolf question. Do you think it's possible to have a dragon and live a benevolent life? Like, would you inherently get pulled into using that power?
Well, that's an interesting question too, and it's a question, if I may verge away from medieval history and metaphor to the current reality we live in. It's often been said that the dragons are the nuclear weapons of my imaginary world. They are the most devastating weapon, and they cause great destruction, massive loss of life. But they're not necessarily, this is part of Dany's storyline in the original novels. I mean, Dany has 3 dragons, and she can destroy these cities, like Meereen, where she finds herself queen, but that doesn't mean she can necessarily rule them easily without destroying them. So when do you do that? And I grew up, I'm a baby boomer, born in 1948, and growing up in the 50s, there was always the specter of nuclear war. I mean, I lived through the Cuban Missile Crisis and Khrushchev and, saber rattling and, all of the books about the nuclear holocaust, about Armageddon, what was going to happen. We were worried about that. Actually, nuclear weapons have only been used twice in all of history, and they've been used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Afterwards, there was a long period where only America had nuclear weapons. Nobody else in the world had them. And there were people, believe it or not, like you're a science fiction fan, you know who Robert A. Heinlein was.
Yep.
Heinlein, the dean of science fiction, fascinating guy, because his politics, a lot of people think of him as conservative because of where he got in the end of his life. But earlier, when he was a young man, he was sort of a socialist. He ran for office in California on Upton Sinclair's platform. And he actually advocated in letters that you can find that at the end of World War II, when only America had the atomic bomb, he said America should give the atomic bomb to the newly formed United Nations, and it should be prohibited to all other countries. So we would have a world government, and only the United Nations would be able to enforce things. And can you imagine if that had actually been done? What a very, very different world that we would live in. Maybe not one that we would like, but there's there. And thereafter, there was always these concerns about, well, we can win any of these wars. MacArthur and some other people wanted to use the atomic bomb in Korea, in the Korean War. When China invaded, why are we letting them do that? We could win the war. Of course, by then the Russians, I think, had it too. Or Barry Goldwater in the 1964 election. Why are we fighting this war in Vietnam? Let's just drop a nuke on Hanoi, or at least that was the charge. But we never did it. We always refrained. We were the dragon riders who would not use our dragons, although we would kind of use them to intimidate them. Except now, more and more countries have that. We've tried nuclear non-proliferation, but Britain got them, Soviet Union got them, Britain got them, France got them. Then it went to India and Pakistan and North Korea, for God's sakes. And Iran is trying to get them, and there's always the rumors that Israel has them. As more and more countries get this, I think the danger becomes greater and greater that someday someone is going to use them. And right now the danger is very high. I mean, you can turn on the news every day. Is Putin losing the war in Ukraine? Is he going to resort to nukes? And then the question becomes, what if he does? If Putin resorts to nukes, does America unleash its dragons? Or do we not and let him get away from it? These are profound questions. We could debate this for an hour with a panel of political scientists and things like that, and it's not an easy answer to.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we're not going to come up with the answer. We can talk about Rise of the Dragon, though.
Sure.
And in particular, the visuals, the artwork in it. We're gonna take a look at some. But there are quite a number of artists who contribute to it, right? Like how many or
well, there's 150 illustrations, not 150 different artists, but many different artists from all around the world. Very well-known fantasy artists and artists you'd never heard of before. Right. But my team here at Random House and 10 Speed Press, which is a imprint, helped put them together in consultation with Ray Golden, who is my own one of my assistants and my art director. And there's some spectacular work there.
Absolutely.
I've always loved, I'm again a baby boomer, and some of the books that I had when I was quite young were illustrated books. I'm particularly thinking of things like Treasure Island and King Arthur and his Knights. They were illustrated by amazing artists like N.C. Wyeth and Howard Pyle, Men of Iron, Howard Pyle. Gorgeous books, and they imprinted on me at an early age, and I always loved illustrated books. By the time I started publishing my own books, though, nobody was doing illustrated books anymore. They were too, especially the big fancy ones with the color plates, they were too expensive, and it was felt they wanted to keep prices down. But fortunately, as the years went by and my books became more popular, suddenly small presses began to appear and saying, well, we'd like to do a small limited edition. And I said, well, I want it illustrated. So we started doing more and more illustrated books, and now even we're having the main, this book is full of tons of black and white illustrations by Douglas Wheatley, and this one has, as I said, many different artists, 150 illustrations, many in color. And I love it. And we also do an annual Ice and Fire calendar. That is usually one artist doing 12 or 13 pictures, sometimes multiple artists, each doing one. Okay.
Well, let's take a look at some of these images. I believe I can present Field of Fire, Conquest, and we can take a look at it here, and the visual will come up for people. So, Field of Fire, what can you say about this?
Well, the Field of Fire, of course, was one of the major battles of Aegon's conquest. And, Aegon the Conqueror had a dragon, Balerion the Black Dread, and his two sisters, who were also his wives, also had dragons. And when the conquest was on, they largely split up, and they went to different places and fought different battles, subduing lords. But in the Field of Fire, the king in the west and the king of the Reach joined forces, and those are two very rich and populous things. So they assembled a vast army, and they marched to meet Aegon. and wipe him out. His army was many, many times smaller. He'd conquered a few of the lesser lords, and who had then bent the knee and joined him, but he could not match the number of knights and all that they had. But he did have the 3 dragons.
Yeah.
And even that is, nuclear metaphors aside, even that might not have been sufficient, because a dragon is like a giant flamethrower. They can, shoot out a bolt of fire, but if you have 50,000 people, how many can one bolt of fire hit, Mm-hmm. But the big factor and the big mistake that the lords, the kings of the Reach and the Rock made was it was a dry period. They were crossing grasslands with tall grasses on either side. They were, of course, their horses were trampling down them, but they were surrounded by this tall, very dry grass. And Aegon and his sisters not only burned the knights, but they set fire to the grass behind them and on either side of them. And the whole field went up in walls of flame. There was no way out, or very hard way out. So it was a total rout and a victory. Wiped out the Gardeners entirely, who were the kings of the Reach, and the Lannisters. Some of them survived and had to bend the knee.
All right. So reflective of history as well, and warfare, and how much the use of the landscape. And
well, yes, the landscape is very important, and I do love, as I say, I love reading history. I love reading historical fiction, and real medieval battles. The military history is also fascinating to me. A movie like Braveheart. I enjoyed Braveheart, but historically, it's they're taking stuff from that centuries apart and putting it together. But the thing in Braveheart that really got me and practically had me foaming in the aisles is when they did the Battle of Stirling, which of course was the Battle of Stirling Bridge. The bridge was absolutely essential to the Battle of Stirling, and the whole strategy and the victory depended on this bridge and the river, and they took all that out, and it was just a lot of guys in a field running at each other, and that's what was not right.
Right.
So you have to take the ground. I don't care if you're talking, Gettysburg or Zama or Cannae or any of these great battles of history, the Battle of Hastings. You got to know the landscape.
Okay. Let's take a look at another one. Not a landscape, but Aegon II and the Iron Throne. That is an amazing Iron Throne.
Yes, it is. Although I'm not quite sure what there seems to be a second Iron Throne off to the side of it. But yes, that is a very large Iron Throne. There is one that I like even better, which is the Mark Simonetti Iron Throne that he did, I believe, for the World of Ice and Fire. I worked with him, and we consulted a lot on that. There have been, obviously, no Iron Throne exists. I made it up. But the version that HBO did became very iconic, and was used in the show for many years, and there were many replicas about it that showed up at various conventions and promotional events.
I've sat in it.
Right, and I have one in my backyard. But it's much smaller than the one in the books. The one in the books is not symmetrical, and it's huge. It's described as a giant bestial thing, not built by furniture designers, but by blacksmiths, just hammering swords together with dragon fire. And there's steep steps that go up to it, so the king has to climb all the way up. He's sitting like 10 feet above everybody else, looking down on it, which the symbolism of that is very powerful. But when you make a motion picture or a television show, there are practicalities. And that was what HBO encountered very early, back in 2010, 2011. They had a throne room in Ireland, which they had gotten from actually a previous movie. It was a very nice, large throne room, but it didn't have a ceiling big enough for like a 20-foot tall throne. And even if it had, you know, you would have needed a soundstage as big as St. Paul's Cathedral or Westminster Abbey, which we didn't have. And then how do you shoot the king on top of the throne? You would need you'd be angling up all the time, or put a camera angle down. You would have needed a crane. It would have made the whole thing much more complex. When we did House of the Dragon, though, Ryan Condal and his people tried to get closer to the conception of the throne, and they designed the one that you're seeing, which has all the spikes on the other side. It's considerably more intimidating, but it's not. It doesn't have the height thing. Now, this version of the Iron Throne has the height. It's kind of crooked rather than being straight like in some others. But it's a pretty cool Iron Throne, I think, with hundreds, if not thousands, of swords in it. And it's had a baby.
Well, that's certainly one of the great things about these illustrations, that it can be reimagined in so many different ways.
Right.
And that's pretty cool. One more, the tourney of 111 AC, the green and the blacks.
Right. Well, in this case, it's the white. It's you know, we're showing what is, I presume, a Kingsguard knight who wore white cloaks and pure white armor, and he's you know, on this magnificent horse. You see the heraldry behind him, many of the competing houses. I love heraldry. I work. I work when we were doing the first books, and I first had contact with Elio Garcia of Westeros. We spent years trying to do designs for the heraldry. Some of it you could find in old books of heraldry. Some of it we had to create whole cloth because there was no one to do that. I mean, I could talk for 20 minutes about heraldry, but that would probably bore the hell out of your people. It is interesting that Westeros heraldry is much cooler than real world heraldry, because everybody in the real world, everybody liked lions and eagles. You never saw a hedgehog or some of the other cool heraldic things. But I try to use it all in Westeros, and it's fun.
Absolutely. Okay, I could keep talking to you, but we need to move on to the next segment. We're going to see a video, or wait, let me make sure I'm getting this right. A video, and there's an excerpt from the audio of Fire and Blood. So.
And then you're vanished?
And then I will have to vanish. Yep.
All right, well, before you vanish and before we show this video, I want to congratulate you and make an announcement that's very cool. Some of you may know that in addition, I have other books. I occasionally wrote other books that were not part of Westeros or that. And one of them that I wrote way back in 1978 was a short story about a dragon, an ice dragon, and it's called The Ice Dragon. Just a short story. As I said, it's primarily a kid's story. But we are going to make that. Warner Brothers Animation has purchased the rights to it, and we're going to expand it to a fully animated film from Warner Brothers Animation. A theatrical film, we hope to be released in a motion picture palace near you, and David Anthony Durham will be writing the screenplay. And he better do a good job.
I know. Yes, so pleased to get that assignment, and so daunted by actually having that assignment. But I love the story, and I'm starting to dig into making it into a movie. Thanks for announcing it too.
Oh, my pleasure.
Appreciate that.
And I should say that the Ice Dragon is not part of the Westeros universe, so some people seem to think so. I wrote the Ice Dragon in 1978. I didn't even think of Westeros until 1991. So there was a considerable, 13 years in between there.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that. It's been a pleasure. I will now bow out. Thank you all as well.
Hi. Well, I'm back with my friend, and we're going to answer a few fan questions that have been sent in here. Which of your characters would you most like to have dinner with? Well, that would depend in part on the purpose of the dinner. if I wanted wit and entertainment, Tyrion Lannister. Very few people as funny or witty as Tyrion, but he's also dangerous too. If you annoy him, he could send you to the dungeon or cut your head off. If I was simply looking for a wonderful meal, go to Pentos and eat with Illyrio Mopatis. He has some marvelous feasts set before him. Or I suppose you could go to the the inn on the Trident and see what Hot Pie was whipping up. Another character that might be fun to have dinner with would be Shay when she was alive, but probably for reasons that I shouldn't go into. Is there a character that you would have liked to explore and write more about, but not able to in A Song of Ice and Fire or Fire and Blood? Well, yes, there are, in fact, a lot of characters. One of the things about Fire and Blood in particular is its nature as a history meant I was summarizing things. And as I summarized those things, and characters appeared, be they major or minor, there was always part of me, the novelist part, in the back of my mind said, oh, I could write a whole novel about that character. Oh boy, I wish I had time I could at least write a story about them. And I've been tempted to do that many times. There are some characters, it's hard to explain in some ways why some characters trigger something in me or fascinate me and others maybe don't, but a character like the Dragon Knight, this very gallant, one of the greatest knights in the history of Westeros, or Nettles, who is a dragon rider in the dance. Where does she come from? Where does she go to? What is her life like? What is her life like after she fades from the public sphere? Those are interesting. I have thought at various points of writing an entire novel about a character we haven't gotten to yet, Aegon IV, Aegon the Unworthy. He's like the Henry VIII of Westeros, except worse. He has all these mistresses, and he's not a nice guy, but he's an interesting guy, and that's something that fascinates me. What makes a villain? What makes a hero? Are there people who are all good and all evil? I don't know, but there's a million characters. I just need to live to be 150, and I can write all of this. What was one of your favorite scenes to write in a series, and one of your least favorite? Well, one scene, I don't know if I could name one favorite scene and one least favorite scene. I did generally always like writing about Tyrion. The Tyrion chapters seem to write themselves. And I had a very hard time, the struggle was writing from Bran, because Bran, of all the characters, was the one who was most involved in magic. And I think magic and fantasy, sorcery, the supernatural, all of these things have to be handled with a great deal of care, or they can overwhelm the story. So I rewrote some of those Bran chapters over and over again, and I'm still struggling with the new ones that are in the Winds of Winter, but hopefully we're getting there. What scene from Fire and Blood are you most excited to see brought to the screen? Well, yeah, the battle over the Guard's Eye. Although that battle that they did in the season finale was pretty amazing too. What is your favorite, seemingly minor moment that changed the course of Westeros' history? There are a couple of them. I think in the Hedge Knight, the first Dunk and Egg story, the death of Baelor Breakspear, who was the heir next in line to the throne, and I think would have been a very strong and very competent king, who dies to defend the honor of an insignificant hedge knight. How is Westeros history different if Baelor does not die? That would be very significant. And similarly, the whole Dance with the Dragons, I mentioned earlier, the heir and the spear. I mean, Jaehaerys, the old king, had 13 children. It seemed the succession was very solid. He had the proverbial heir and the spear and two very competent sons, Aemon and Balon. And Aemon was killed while flying on his dragon to Tarth to help defend the isle against some pirates and Mirish people. And he was killed by a crossbow bolt that was not even meant for him. There was, the Evenstar of Tarth, the Lord, was well known to the Mirish, and they were determined to take him out. And the crossbowmen didn't even recognize who was this new guy who was walking alongside him, but he just missed. And suddenly the whole succession was thrown into doubt. And in some ways you could say that was one of the first things that caused the Dance of the Dragons. When you first imagined the characters in A Song of Ice and Fire and Blood, were there any that changed in unexpected ways as the story developed? Yes. In fact, there were so many that I couldn't even begin to tell you. It's the way I write. I've talked about this in many interviews and many blog posts. Two types of writers, the architect and the gardener. And the architect plans everything ahead of time, but the gardener just starts to write the story and the characters come alive and they take him in unexpected directions. And sometimes it's an unexpected character who pops up and captivates you and takes over the story and does take it in unexpected directions. I remember one of the first characters to do that was Bronn. Tyrion is on the road and he meets at an inn. He runs into these two sellswords, Bronn and Chiggin, and then he gets arrested by Catelyn Stark, and he has to travel to the Eyrie, and he's put on trial, and Bronn steps forward to defend him. I needed someone. It could have easily been Chiggin at that stage, but no, I killed Chiggin. I just guessed I liked the name Bronn better, and the more time Tyrion spent with Bronn, the more interesting the character became to me. I wanted to know who he was and what about him, and I liked his dialogue. I liked the sound of him. He played very well off Tyrion. So, but that's only one character. There are many, many other characters that have done the same thing to a greater or less extent in these books. If you could choose a time or place in Westerosi history that you could revisit in future stories, what would it be? Virtually everything in Fire and Blood, all the histories, there's part of me that would love to flesh them out a little more. Tell the full story in the form of a novella or a novel. And we saw even more of that in the TV show. I mean, we had 10 episodes. People have said that time jumps were jarring to them, and Rhaenyra's relationship with Harwin Strong. She had 3 children by him, but we never even, we never see them get together for the first time. We don't know exactly what has happened and how he felt about that and how Laenor felt about him. There's a whole story there. There's at least a novella, maybe a novel, but we simply did not have the time to tell it. And it did not fit the format of my history book. So, but it's a story, and I would love to do that. Fire and Blood is strongly informed by the biases of Archmaester Gildane and Mushroom. Well, Mushroom is only one of Gildane's sources. There's also Eustace and Orwyle, who recount these events. Do you consider House of the Dragon to be a companion piece to the book that shows the true nature of events as they actually happened, or will only you ever know the truth? Well, how meta do you want to get? I mean, there is no truth. I make all this stuff up. Archmaester de Gildane, mushroom, all of those things. And what is the truth? Will we ever know the truth of Hannibal or Spartacus, as in David's novel? Will we ever know the truth of what happened at the Black Dinner of Scotland? Will we ever know the truth of any of these things? The truth gets obscured. So I say with Kipling, there are 9 and 20 ways of constructing tribal lays, and every single one of them is right. Are you team black or team green? Well, I don't know. Read the book. You have to make your own mind up on that. Maybe I'm a bit of both teams. What smaller house in Westeros is the most fascinating to you, and why? Again, that's a tough one. I do get interested in the history of many of these smaller houses. Obviously, House of Valerion, which was largely very much in the background in A Song of Ice and Fire, but is very much in the foreground of Fire and Blood and House of the Dragon, is a house that has engaged me. And you know, one of the successor shows we're working on is called 9 Voyages. It's the earlier voyage of Corlys Valerion, who was the Sinbad the Sailor, the Magellan, the Captain Kirk on the water of Westeros, and he made these incredible 9 voyages to the far ends of the earth. So House Valerion is one that's interested in me. I've always had a soft spot for House Blackwood, which has an interesting history, and they're one of the few houses south of the Neck that still follows the old gods and has a weirwood tree, and they have not adopted the faith of the Seven. That's an interesting to me. How did they work out? Some of the houses in Dorne interest me a great deal. You know, Nymeria, how she unified all of Dorne, all of the petty kingdoms. That's fascinating, and we hope to tell that story too in one of the successor shows, 10,000 Ships. But also House Starfall, which is the House Dane, which is headquarters at Starfall, and they have the sword Dawn, which is even more potent than the Valyrian steel swords. It's forged from a fallen star, and the man who wields it is called the Sword of the Morning. And they have at least in my head, they have a very colorful, rich, kind of mysterious, interesting background that one day I would like to write about. There just need to be 7 of me, and there need to be 37 hours in a day, and I need to be 35 years old again. But sadly, none of these things are likely to occur. And finally, yes, the question I knew I was going to get. Do you have an update on The Winds of Winter? You know, it's the same update I've been giving for a long time. I continue to work on it. It continues to get longer and longer. I mean, I was working on it the day before I flew back here for 3 or 4 days, but I was rereading some chapters that I'd written earlier, and I didn't like them well enough, and so I kind of ripped them apart and rewrote them. And I've had some ideas while I've been on this trip. I got to get back and hopefully get to it while the ideas are still fresh in my head. It's a big book. I've said that before. It's a challenging book. It's probably going to be a larger book than any of the previous volumes in the series. The Dance with Dragons and Storm of Swords are the 2 largest books in the series. They were both about 1,500 manuscript pages. I think this one is going to be longer than that by the time I finish it, and I think I'm about 3/4 of the way done, maybe. But that's not 100% done, so I have to continue to work on it. And of course, then there's the issue here of my friends at Random House. When I deliver this monstrous book that will be as big as this dragon, are they going to try to make me cut it in 2, or are they going to do something other horrible to me? No. We'll find out about that. But first I have to finish it. I I have to get it all done, and I've given up making predictions because people press me and press me, when's it going to be done, and I make what I think is the best case estimate, and then stuff happens. And yeah, that's, then everybody gets mad that I lied. I've never lied about these predictions. They're the best I can make, but I guess I overestimate my ability to get stuff done, and I underestimate the amount of interruptions and other projects and other demands that will distract me, and so on and so on. But it's in progress. I'm working on it. I'm creeping forward, but one day it will be done, and then it will come out, and then the next day someone will tweet me, "When will we see a dream of spring?" So yes, I can see the future. I'm a science fiction guy. Anyway, that's all we have for you tonight. So I hope you've enjoyed this talk. It was great having David here. I think we could have talked for another 2 or 3 hours, but he has to get home and get working on the Ice Dragon. So do pick up Fire and Blood. Do pick up this incredible art book that we have, Rise of the Dragons, and also, please do pick up some of my wildcard books. David is in those, along with a lot of other marvelous writers. And pick up some of David's own novels, his Acacia high fantasy series, his books about Hannibal and Pride of Carthage. Terrific reads, and I think you'll really enjoy them if you like historical fiction, historical fantasy, epic fantasy, any of these things. So, thank you. And good night.